Test 1, 2. Test, test, test. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started this evening. It's good to see everybody. Glad everyone can join us for our social media session tonight. This was kind of a brainchild of several of us here at Fairlane talking about issues that are impacting our kids and our teens and our families, and one of those being social media. And we know that it's here to stay. It's not going anywhere. So how do we as a church, as a community, use social media in a way that is going to bless and enhance the kingdom of God? How do we use it to be good Christians and good followers of Jesus? And so tonight, I've asked Jeff Brown and David Vaughn here from Kingwood in Murfreesboro. I've known Jeff. I was thinking about this the other day, Jeff. We've known each other for close to 30 years. That's a long time. I am getting old. Jeff doesn't age at all. I get old. And I've known David the past 5 years, but my wife Misty knew him prior from that, from her work at Lipscomb. So Misty and David go back quite a bit. But these are two men who love Jesus, who love to help families and bless families through their ministry, and we are thrilled and blessed to have them with us tonight. So I'm going to say a prayer of blessing over them, and then they can come and begin their presentation to us. Let's pray. Father, you are good to us, and Father, as much as we love our kids and our families, we know that you love them more. And so, Father, as we consider this topic of social media that impacts all of us to some degree, Father, we pray tonight that you open up our hearts and minds, that we can learn, that we can grow, and that we can discover ways that we can use this tool to glorify you, to bless our kids, to bless our families, to bless our church, to bless this community. Father, may the change that we wish to see in this world begin with us. And as far as social media goes, what changes need to happen, may that begin with us and our families. And may we be examples of and good stewards of what you bless us with. Father, I pray you be with Jeff and David tonight. Bless them as they speak to us. Just clear their hearts and minds. Help them to be able to communicate those things that you want to communicate tonight, and just use them as your servants. Father, again, thank you for this evening. In your son's name we pray. Amen.
Well, thank you, Lance, and good evening. How's everybody doing? Good. We'll come a little closer here. First of all, I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here. And even more importantly, I want to thank you for you clearing your schedule to be here tonight. There's a lot of things you could be doing at 5 o'clock on a Sunday evening. And you choosing to be here with us is an encouragement to us, and we appreciate that. We're going to begin by talking about who we are. Who are Jeff and David? And as Lance told you, I didn't realize it had been 30 years, but as Lance said, we've known each other for about 30 years. I've known Michael since, what was that, 2012, so since 12, Michael and I worked together in East Tennessee. I've been in ministry since 93, full-time, 1993. Started in youth ministry, working with teens in South Florida. And then after about 5 years, I moved to Chattanooga, and this is where Lance and I began to know each other and work together some back in the late 90s, 98 is when I got to Chattanooga. And I spent 10 and a half years there preaching, and then I moved to East Tennessee. That's where I was connected to Michael for a few years. And then I moved to Murfreesboro in 2015, November 1st of 2015. I've been preaching there since then. I am a husband of over 30 years now. It's 33 years. I'm a father. I've got two teens two that are no longer in teens, praise the Lord. They're growing up. They're adult children now. They both have graduated from Lipscomb University. My son is in the mortgage industry, and my daughter is a nurse at Skyline Hospital in Nashville. Again, I'm in ministry, been in ministry full-time since 1993. And I will tell you this about me before I let David share some things about himself. I'm not experts in social media. But we're going to try to come at this tonight from a perspective of what we've seen as ministers, the counseling we have done with families, the things that we read, the things that we research. We're going to come at this also from parents. Watching, my two kids, and maybe your two kids as well, kind of grew up as social media is really coming into the picture. And we were trying to navigate social media before any church was putting on things about how to navigate social media. And I won't speak for David here, but I'll speak for myself. I made a lot of mistakes in this area. And if I had it to do over again, hopefully I would be better at kind of navigating social media and teaching my children to navigate it as well. So we're not experts by any stretch of the imagination, but we'll be drawing on our ministerial experience, our parenting experience, and just life in general, just what we see. So that's a little bit about me. Let David tell you a little bit about him.
Absolutely. So I was sitting here trying to figure out why we were invited. I know why I was invited, because Jeff didn't want to drive by himself down here. He needed an accountability partner or something to keep him between the lines there. But I think we were the guinea pigs, right? Our kids are a little older maybe, and we've made a lot of mistakes. So that's why we have some, I don't want to say expertise, but experience in this. I was a youth minister for 12 years at the Antioch Church of Christ in Nashville, Tennessee. Then transitioned there to children's and family minister for a while. My role at Kingwood, I've been there going on 10 years now. My current role is involvement minister. I do a lot with our families, a lot with our adult education, things like that. I basically do the things that Jeff doesn't want to do. And hopefully I do them well enough that he keeps letting me do those things. So I'm married, been married since 1995, so that's 28 years. We have 2 children. One is a firefighter. He's in Murfreesboro, and went to Harding University. He's in his mid-20s. Another that will be enrolling this fall at East Tennessee State as a student. So he is 20 as well. So I have seen a lot, and it's funny. I was thinking kind of on the way down here about how technology has impacted ministry, how it's impacted families, how it's impacted me, how it's impacted marriages. It's amazing. And so I would admire you guys. I applaud you guys for having this conversation. And that would be my take on this, is that there weren't a lot of resources available for parents, say 10, 15 years ago. So this is great that you're engaging in a discussion, and we're hoping to add to that. We're not going to boost your IQ or anything like that, but hopefully we'll raise some questions, maybe give you some resources, maybe stir some thoughts, and just help you generate discussion in your church family here to kind of make that a productive thing.
Yeah, just out of curiosity, raise your hand if you're on at least one social media app. Raise your hand if you're on at least one. All right, keep them up if you're on at least 2, 3, 4, 5 or more. I'm only one. You 5 or more?
No.
Okay.
I'm 5
Who
Who knows what social media is? It was going to be my first question. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. So, all right. Do you remember when you first got on it? Anybody remember the first one you used? Which one was first? What did you use first? Facebook? How many of you used Facebook first? My daughter, I think, if I remember right, was in the 3rd grade. We were in Chattanooga. We had not moved to Kingston yet. And she developed a staph infection in her shoulder. And we watched it was in the bones of her shoulder. And they circled it. They put her in the hospital, and they circled this infection with a black marker. And we watched it spread outside that black marker. And we spent about 10 days in the hospital, and then she was on medication for a long time. It was in the hospital, at Erlanger Hospital in Chattanooga, that I first got on social media. It was on Facebook. And my very first profile picture in Facebook was taken in the hospital room in the evening with the lights down low, and I promise you, it looked like a mugshot. And people have joked with me about that. This was a mugshot. That's what it looked like. That's when my social media journey began. Had no idea, had no clue whatsoever how much social media would impact my personal life, my family's life, the lives of my children, and David, the lives of the church as well, because we are all on social media, broadcasting, live streaming, doing all kind of things, under the guise of spirituality and Christianity. Never did I realize when I took that mugshot way back when that this would penetrate so often and be to the point where it is today. If you have your Bibles or phones or iPads, whatever, turn over to James chapter 1, verse 27. I want to share a verse with you before we get into some of the things we're going to share with you tonight about social media. And I looked up social media in the scriptures. And you know what I found? Somebody take a guess. Absolutely nothing, right? So a lot of the presentation we're going to give you tonight, it's not going to have scripture attached to it, but we're going to reference scripture because I think what we have to do, and this is kind of going to be the theme verse for us tonight, James 1:27 says, religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress. And we talk about that. We've probably heard lessons on that. We have some churches in our fellowship that believe that's an individual responsibility, not just a church responsibility. But then it's the second part that I want us to focus on. And to keep oneself from being what? What does it say? Depending on which translation you're reading, what does it say? What are we supposed to do? Abstain or keeping ourselves from being polluted by the world. Okay? And that's really what we want to talk about tonight is how to navigate social media in a way that we don't allow Satan to pollute our individual lives. Now, we need to affirm social media just for a little bit because when you think about this topic, you got two things you can do. You can say, as one of our elders says all the time, social media is of the devil. That's what he says. Every time we talk about social media, we have one elder who says it is straight from Satan. Okay? He's not on any social media whatsoever. All he sees about social media are the negative effects. So he says it is of Satan and we ought to avoid it. That could be an option. We could come in tonight and tell you just need to shut it all down. Don't use it. Don't get on it. Just abstain from doing anything in the social media arena. But the reality is that's probably not going to happen because our culture and our society is so saturated with it, and there are so many positive things about it that if used wisely, social media can be a good tool for us. So we're not here tonight to tell you don't use it. We're here to talk to you tonight about how to navigate it, see the dangers, look at the dangers, and figure out how, as an individual follower of Jesus, we navigate through that. David, do you have any thoughts along those lines?
Maybe one illustration. I was sitting here thinking, this building has electricity in it, right? I mean, there's light bulbs, there's all kinds of things, microphones. I can remember a lot of times in elementary school, I'm not going to tell you what year that was, but we got all these lessons about, don't stick things in outlets and be careful about electricity and all this stuff. Never once did I think we should stop having electricity because of the potential for danger, because the potential for good was also there. And so I guess that would be my point, is that it's something to talk about and be aware of. Yeah, social media can be a dangerous thing, and we're going to talk about that in a few moments. But, think about the other things that are good. There's the educational aspect. You talked about the hospital, the ability to connect to people. And so there's probably some other things you want to mention there, but that was the thing I was thinking.
Yeah. All right, so by the way, we're going to go through a lot of statistics about culture and social media. We've got some dangers for the general population. We're going to talk about some dangers to teenagers specifically. For those parents that have younger children that aren't navigating social media yet, hopefully this will be something that in the future, this will be beneficial to you. And then at the end, we're going to give you some action steps on how kind of to navigate this from our experiences, from our research. And then we're going to have just a brief period of question and answer at the end. So I think Lance said we could go to about 9 or 9:30. So I think we'll get out by 8:45. So yeah, the clock says 4:20, so we got a long way to go. But no, 6:15 he said, so we're going to try to get you out at that time. But we're going to have time for question and answer here as well. Let me go through some statistics, some social media statistics about social media and culture to show you primarily how saturated our culture is with social media. For example, 60% of the world's population uses social media. 60%. Now, how many of you thought that would be higher than 60%? Anybody? Anybody think it would be lower than 60%? Well, think about this. 60% of the population, first of all, is a lot of people. Secondly, we have a lot of areas in our world that do not simply have the technology that allows them to have social media. Does that make sense? We did some, I know this sounds rough, back in the early 90s when I was in youth ministry, we did some mission work in the Bahamas. And you're thinking, man, that sounds rough. Well, it really was, because we were on a primitive island, Cat Island, that had about 1,200 people on it. It was about 40 miles in length and about 1 mile across from side to side. And the first year I ever got there was the first year that they ever had electricity on the island. They didn't have any cell phones. They didn't have any internet. They didn't, social media was not really a thing back then. They didn't even run their lights. You're talking about lights. They didn't even run their lights because they couldn't afford to run their lights. Once they got it wired in, they saw we can't afford it. So, and even to this day, they don't have some of those luxuries that we have. So it makes sense when you think 60% of the world's population is on social media. A large reason it's just 60% is there's a lot of people in our world that just don't have access to this. You get out into the primitive areas that don't have the technology capability as we do, you'll see this. 4.8 billion people around the world use some form of social media. And just in the last 12 months, we've had 150 million new users. So this is a rapidly growing phenomenon. Continuing on, average daily amount, I'm going to pick this up, these are pretty small, but listen to this. Average daily amount of time spent on social media, this does not single in on teens, this is just in general, is 2 hours and 24 minutes. Now, how many of you are surprised by that number? Did you think it was more or less? What do you think? Shout it out. More? Okay. Well, look at what happens with teens. Okay, if you go to the next one here, look what happens. For ages 13 to 17, how many 13, 17-year-olds we have in here? We got some here? These guys, according to statistics, spend 8.3 hours per day on social media. Ages 13 to 17, 8.3 hours a day. And of course, some of the most common ones that we've talked about are Facebook, YouTube, WhatsApp, Instagram, WeChat, TikTok, Facebook Messenger, and Snapchat. Those are among some of the favorites. We live in a culture, particularly in the United States, we live in a culture that is saturated with social media. And I know that there's always things you can argue about when it comes to when I saw the 2 hours and 24 minute statistic, I thought, oh man, it's way higher. But that's the general population. When I looked at the teen statistics, 13 to 17, and saw 8.3 hours, I'm like, how could you spend that much time? But you might see how as we go through here. Go to the next slide. David's going to talk to us about where this came from.
Yeah, that's a lot of time, as you mentioned, and that kind of begs the question. Before we get into the dangers of social media, what's going on? Why was it created? Did someone, maybe you are familiar with the story of Facebook and things like that, but these are businesses, right? They have an intent to get your attention. And so social media was created by people in Silicon Valley who understood addiction. They understood the way that the brain works and wants those little dopamine surges, right? Those little positive rewards. And so when these sites were and different ways of being on social media were created, they're designed to get you to continue using them, right? And so why is that important? Why do people spend, think back to television for a minute, or any other form of advertising or attention getting. What's the bottom line? Money, right? It's money. And so more brain time equals more money. And so sometimes we, in the middle of social media stuff, participating, being engaged in that, we don't stop and think, okay, why does this even exist? What's going on there? And so it's good to maybe set the stage for what we're about to discuss a little bit more by making that obvious.
Yeah, let me give you an example of how we know this is about money. How much do you pay to get on Facebook? It's not a trick question. How much? You don't pay anything. I don't pay anything to get on Facebook. But have you ever had this experience? You're sitting at home, you're talking to your family, and you tell your family something like, I need a new riding lawnmower, or I need a new weed eater. Or you get on the internet and you think, I need a living room suit. So you go to rooms to go and you type in living room suit and you start looking at some things. And then you sign in on Facebook. And what's the first advertisement you see on Facebook? Living room suits or lawnmowers, right? And those folks have paid good money to be on Facebook in hopes that you'll click on their information so that if you're going to buy that living room suit, buy that lawnmower, you're going to buy it from them. That whole thing's kind of scary, by the way, when you start talking about stuff and then it shows up on your social media. That's a little bit scary. All right, so speaking of scary, let's talk about some of the dangers of social media. And these are no particular order, but here's the first one. It creates a false sense of relationships and connections. Now, I did not bring my phone in today, and I meant to do this today, but I think I'm somewhere between, 1,400 to 2,000 friends on Facebook. I'm not even sure I know that many people, okay? But I've got, somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 people who I'm Facebook friends with who have some kind of access to my life depending on what I post on Facebook. And sometimes some of those folks that I really have no clue who they are. Like I'll get, being in ministry, I'll get requests from people all over the country because, their cousin's brother's sister, heard me speak somewhere, joined Facebook or friend requested me on Facebook. Now they're following me on Facebook, and now this long-lost relative is following me on Facebook, and I have no clue who they are, okay? And then they'll post something and interact with me in stuff that I post. And the way we're interacting with each other, it almost, if you didn't know any better, would look at that and say, well, they've known each other for a long time. And truth of the matter is, I don't really know who they are. It creates a false sense of relationships. It creates a false sense of connections because here's what I found out. Those folks that just jump on my page because, they know somebody that did, all it takes for them to either get off my page or confront me about something is for them to disagree with something I post. Has that ever happened to you? You post something spiritually, maybe you've got enough courage to post something politically, and they disagree with it either way, and all of a sudden you're not very good friends. It creates a false sense of relationships and connection, and some of the other social media sites will do that even more than Facebook will. I don't know if you have anything to share on that one. So let's go to the next one. It can steal precious time. As we pointed out a minute ago, on average, the general population's on it basically 2.5 hours a day. Teens are on it much, much longer. If that 8 hour and some odd minute statistic is right, they're spending a third of their day on social media. And I'm not going to put them on the spot and ask them tonight, you think that's true or false, but I can tell you from a lot of teens' experience, from perspectives that I've seen, that's probably a true number. I know for my kids, David, I don't know about yours, but one of the mistakes we probably made with our kids when they were younger, late middle school, early high school, when social media was coming out, is we allowed them to have their phones in their rooms when they went to bed. And I thought, man, I've got the best kids ever. They're going to bed at 9:30 on a school night. That's awesome. And then you couldn't hardly get them out of bed because they didn't go to bed at 9:30. What did they do from 9:30 to 2 in the morning? They were on social media or some other thing to do. So it can steal precious time. Think about it this way. If I spend, let's say I go to bed at 10 o'clock at night and I spend 2 hours, 3 hours navigating through all my social media, doesn't matter which one it is. Then all of a sudden, if I go to bed at 10, all of a sudden it's 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning. And I've got to be at work the next morning at 7 o'clock. You're prohibiting yourself that precious time to rest and rejuvenate and get ready for what's coming up, it just steals time. And then we might sit around, David, see if you agree with this, we might sit around and think, man, I don't ever have time to do anything. Well, we might if we put the social media down sometimes, right? If we didn't spend as much time on it. So it can steal precious time as we go through. And David, jump in anytime you want to. Continuing on, go to the next one. It pollutes the mind. It can pollute the mind. And by the way, we should have probably said this a little stronger. I should have said this a little stronger at the beginning of our time together tonight. It doesn't have to do these things. Okay? When I say it can pollute our mind, it doesn't mean it has to or we have to let it. I probably should have affirmed that there are a lot of positive things about social media that if we use right, social media can be great. So we're not saying this is what happens for everybody. But if we're not careful, if we're not disciplined, it can pollute the mind. And remember James 1:27? Pure and faultless religion is to look after the orphans and widows in their stress. And what was that second part? And to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. So this can pollute the mind. Fourthly, go to the next one. It allows room, and I think this is one of the biggest ones. It allows room for secret sin. It allows room for secret sin. There are so many things, and David, I do want you to jump in on this one. There are so many ways that social media can be presented to us that will allow us room to sin and nobody ever know it. No, nobody will have. And by the way, this is not just targeting teens or children. This is especially, all of these are true for adults, but this one especially. I've talked to married people who said, oh, I've never cheated on her. I've never cheated on him. But yet the things that one of them may be engaging with in social media is just as sinful as going out and having a physical affair. This just allows room for us to sin and get away with it, or at least we think. Because for adults particularly, nobody's going to be checking our phones. Nobody's going to be checking our iPads. Nobody's going to be checking those things, so we just do whatever we want to do. We look at what we want to look at. We interact with people that we want to interact with. And I think this is one of the most dangerous things about social media. It allows us to sin in the privacy of our home, in the privacy of our bedroom, in our office, wherever, and nobody except God and us know that we're doing it. David, maybe share some thoughts about that.
I will. And the next 2 points kind of tie in with some of this as well. But you said no one's going to be checking our social media. I would advise, this is just my experience, that husbands and wives should be able to check each other's social media. I don't think there should be that's my opinion based on experience. That if my wife's name is Katie, maybe she's watching tonight, I don't know. But if she ever wanted to say, I want to check your messages or whatever, for whatever reason, that's fine. It gives me accountability. It preserves that union, that covenant that we've made. And so we might make that comparison, that comparison in a few minutes to parents and children and the ability to be able to check. But the thing about the false sense of relationships and connections, I think, is what kind of breeds some of this. It's almost like we enter, and this is everybody. This is not targeted at the teens. This is everybody. We enter kind of this vicarious experience where we're talking to people that maybe I've looked up friends from childhood that I lost touch with, right? When we lived in another state, and I'm like, I wonder whatever happened to them. And I've looked at them and found them and seen their family and reached out to them and thought, hey, send them a message. Remember when we, built that fort, and remember, all this kind of stuff. And that's been fun. And but there's all those opportunities to foster relationships that are kind of, I don't want to say imaginary, but they're romanticized. And they're not necessarily real. And it's where you remember the good stuff about something and not the real, which would include the other stuff about somebody. And so as we kind of look through these, the allowing room for secret sin, obviously sexual sin is a concern because we're more connected to lots of other people. And we'll talk some specifics in a few minutes, but it's a new thing. There used to be lots of natural barriers in our relationships, which are good and healthy, right? You have to be intentional about seeking out friends. Now, it's almost like you have to be careful who you make friends with. It's almost the other way, to an extreme. So anyway, I'm kind of babbling on, but I think that kind of speaks to it a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think it's a great idea to have your spouse give them the freedom to look at that. Now, when they do, you got to be careful because it could happen, and this happened to me, where, my wife's looking at my Facebook one day and she says, "Oh, you're friends with your old girlfriend in high school." And I'm like, "Well, yeah, what's wrong with that?" She said, "Well, can I be friends with my old boyfriends in high school?" And I said, "Well, no, of course not." All right. So you do that. No, but I think that's great advice. I think it's great advice. Along with this secret sin aspect, it also opens us up to people that may not have our best interest in mind. You see way too many stories of where somebody on the other side of the social media platform is posing to be somebody that they're not. You've seen those stories? Some particularly maybe a teen. A lot of times it's teen girls, but teen girls are lured to an individual who is posing as a teen young man, has the right, says the right things, does the right things, and then it's just not who they are. So it opens us up to people that may not necessarily have our best interests in mind. Going on, the next one, it can drag us into a reality that really doesn't exist. If you get on Facebook, true or false, most of the things you see about people are positive. In other words, they're taking pictures by the beach in all of their white clothing, right? And the pictures are beautiful. And you just look at their profile and they work for this company and they're doing this, they're doing that. They're a member of this church and they're posting what their kids are doing on the baseball fields and what they've done in their careers. And you look at some of these folks that are posting out there in social media and you think to yourself, man, their reality is awesome. But what you don't know is that the marriage is a mess. The parental relationships with their children are non-existent. They're in debt over their heads. In other words, we can clean ourselves up really good, put it out there on social media to give an impression that everything is going well for us, and it can drag us into a reality that really doesn't exist. Does that make sense? You follow me there?
And I would add, Jeff, that's an integrity issue. And I'm not mad at anybody or upset that anybody posts good stuff about going to the beach or whatever. I'm upset they didn't take me, but you know what I mean? It's like it's a good thing to share that, especially if grandma and grandpa are watching or brother. In my case, I've got family that live in like 3 or 4 different states. We're not physically close in location, and so it's neat to be able to catch up with things that way. But there's also an extreme of that where it's like, okay, I'm living this online life where I want everybody to think this about me and like this about me and approve of this about me. And so there's that lack of reality, being in touch with reality.
Let's talk about some dangers that are targeted to teens. For the teens that are in here, for parents of teens, for parents of younger children who will be teens. And I went and grabbed some statistics. And this, I wish I had known some of this when I was helping my children navigate social media, because we were navigating it when it just kind of became a thing. So there were not studies about this, but listen to some of these. The CDC reports that 44% of high school students, that's just almost half, feel hopeless almost daily over 2 weeks in a row. So as they've studied, they've had 44% of their survey audience say that I have felt hopeless for 2 weeks now, almost daily. Okay? More than half of teen girls reported feeling persistently sad. And that was a 10-year high when this study was done. But at the same time, teens are reporting high use of social media, watch this, with about half of teens saying they are on almost constantly. Now, compare almost constantly for a minute to the 8.3 hours. How are teens on almost constantly? What does that mean? It doesn't mean they're every waking moment of the day they're scrolling through social media. What does that mean, though? It means it never gets turned what? Off. And it is very likely that if, and this is true for adults as well, I think sometimes, if you wake up at 3 a.m. and your social media is not off, and you've got every social media app to notify you when something happens, you can wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning, grab your phone, and you may have 50 social media notifications. And because it's intended to be addictive, you aren't going to just look at the first notification. If you looked at number 1, you got to make it all the way to number 50. Because what if somebody sent me that snap and I've got to see it at 3 a.m.? Are you tracking with me? You follow me there? So teens are reporting they are on it almost constantly. What they're saying is we don't ever disengage from it. We may go to bed and we may put our phones on the nightstand on the charger, but if I wake up during the night, I'm going to check it. And sometimes we as adults do that as well. Teens can also be victims, and this is the scary part, they can be victims of cyberbullying, body shaming, and then here's a new word that maybe you haven't heard, but doom scrolling. Okay, has anybody heard the word doom scrolling? Anybody have any idea what that is? One or two? All right, I'll tell you what that is in just a second. But cyberbullying, we could pull a bunch of statistics out, and it is on the rise. It happens in our schools. Bullying is a big issue in all of our schools. Public, private, doesn't matter. But one of the ways that bullying is growing is online. But then body shaming or body comparing. You know, we live in a society that is really concerned about self-image. And this false sense of reality is something that we have to be careful of, because we start seeing people who, you know, every picture they post, you know, it looks great. Maybe it's been edited, maybe it's been photoshopped or whatever. And if you take somebody who has a low self-image and they feel bad about the way they look or the way they feel, and all they see on social media is the glorification of beauty through all these pictures, it's naturally to say, man, I wish I could look like that. And then some of the bullying aspects come in to where they will just come out and say, you don't look like that, you don't think like that, you don't act like that. And then doom scrolling is where you basically, you find some disturbing content that kind of matches things you've already felt. So if you're feeling sadness, if you're feeling despair, if you're feeling fear, you seek that out on social media. You seek out content that talks about sadness or that represents sadness or fear or danger. And it just adds to the layers of what's going on. David, go ahead.
Yeah, let me say a couple things here. And I think going back to the comment earlier about the way social media is set up, you talked about doom scrolling. It's designed to feed you more of what you're looking for, right? You know, Jeff mentioned the what was it? The bedroom suit and the lawnmowers, right? And I'm sure he was looking up UT stuff as well, but that's a whole other sinful area. No, I'm kidding. I love UT as well. But if you're looking up things about why am I sad, and that's not necessarily a bad thing to look up, right? You're looking for help. You're looking for encouragement. But the way social media is designed, it can feed you more and more content that will actually make you sadder or more depressed. And so I've watched and experienced people who have been kind of walking through these downward spirals, and part of it is exacerbated by social media. And it was not their intention. It's just kind of one of those things that happens. So it's something, as we're talking about dangers to teens, it is a danger to all of us as well. And I want to address the two other things there. I think it was body shaming and cyberbullying. So social media is, I don't know if you've heard this, but it's kind of like the current school lunchroom, okay? Do you remember in school, do you remember being in school? Let's start with that one. Some of you do. Okay, hopefully you're awake. Wake up. So you remember being in school, and I remember going into the lunchroom. You know, if you went to a school that you hadn't been to before, or you went up in a grade or whatever, and you walk in and you're kind of like, what are you doing with your tray? Where am I gonna what? Sit. And you might look for friends, and you might find your friends. You're like, oh, thank goodness, let me slide in here by you, right? Or, you know, I can't sit with that table because that's that group, whatever that group was. You know, they could be the athletes or the band people, ooh, you know, or something like that, right? I'm just kidding. But you've had to find your group, right? And so once you did, you can't sit with the seniors because I'm a freshman. Or I can't sit over there because that's my brother or sister over there, and they'll have their friends pick on me. All right, that's kind of what social media is in a way. It's a larger lunchroom. And so there's all kinds of things going on there about bullying. And I can remember, you don't have to raise your hand if you're ever bullied in school. I remember being bullied in school, though, when I was in elementary school. I know it's a shock with my massive muscular frame, but I was bullied, and so physically bullied. But I got to go home at 3:30, and the bully wasn't there anymore. I mean, I dreaded the next day because I had to figure out, okay, how am I going to escape this guy? And, you know, what can I do? But the thing about social media is it doesn't stop. I mean, you can turn it off, but people are still connecting and maybe talking about you and sending you. That's dangerous if you can't ever get away from that. I mean, adults who have jobs, sometimes we feel like we can't get away from work. And maybe work's good. Maybe you like work, but you still want a vacation. You still want to go to sleep at night. You still want to have a family life. But if things are bad and people keep, that's awful. Last comment about body shaming. I do quite a bit of premarital counseling. I say quite a bit. I've done a lot over the years. And one of the things I've noticed that increased is when people, one of the instruments that I use is an assessment where people mark things that they struggle with. And this is a lengthy period of time, so I'm not identifying anybody specifically. So if there happened to be someone listening that I did premarital counseling for, good luck. I hope you're doing great, you know. But there's been an increase in the number of people who talk about body image. And that's historically been an issue for teenagers and people who are mentally and physically going through those transitions, but it's been aggravated and magnified by social media, by everybody who looks perfect when I don't. And everybody doesn't look perfect. None of us do in real life. And so, but it's exacerbated. And so I guess that's just my thing and I mean no offense to the teenagers because my brain is not fully developed either. It's pretty obvious. But when you're still growing and maturing and developing physically, your brain is still physically developing, and you're faced with all this onslaught of things, it's hard to process it all when you can't get away from it. And so I just point those things out that it's interesting, especially to me, about the body image thing and how that seems to change.
Absolutely. Go to the next slide and go ahead and put all the points up. Go all the way down to where it says peer pressure. I'll speed this up a little bit because we really spend the rest of our time talking about things we can do. But this was a Mayo Clinic report, and the Mayo Clinic has studied this, and they said here's the dangers of social media to teenagers. It distracts them. They can have their sleep disturbed. That's what I'm talking about. You go to bed at 2 in the morning, or go to bed and wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning, and you get on social media. That can disturb your sleep. We talked about being bullied, being victims of rumor spreading. That can happen on social media, having unrealistic views of the lives of others, and then peer pressure. All of those things are things that we used to have to deal with in person, but as David pointed out, when the school day ended, you could kind of get away from that for several hours until the next day, but you can't get away from any of these things now. And then if you go to the next slide and put it all up, go one more. All right. A 2019 study of 6,500 12 to 15-year-olds showed that those using social media more than 3 hours a day brought about a heightened risk of mental illness. All right? And then a more recent study, this was done in England, of 12,000 13 to 16-year-olds, showed that teens who use social media more than 3 times a day predicted for mental health and well-being among teens. There are more and more studies coming out, and I think that as this continues to morph into something in the future, we're going to see more and more of these studies come out that show that social media, while maybe not being the underlying or primary cause, social media is not good at times for our mental well-being. And we're starting to now see studies, because we've had social media out here long enough now, we're starting to see some reputable people do studies that say this is a factor in some of the mental illness things that we're seeing. And I don't want to ever diminish or lessen the importance of getting help for those who are struggling mentally. It is a growing number. Mental health issues and mental illness is a growing thing in our culture that's going to only get worse. And the studies are starting to show that this is a part of it. Now, we've thrown all that at you, so what do we do about it? Let's talk about some action steps for healthier use. And I'm just going to go through them. We'll talk a little bit about them. I asked David to chime in when we can, but here's the first one. Have open communication with your children about the dangers and how to use it effectively. Now, this is real good for parents who have younger kids that aren't on social media yet. Okay? I see Jesse and Kenzie back here. Hopefully this is going to be good for them as their child gets older, starts navigating the social media world. It's easier to talk to them as they get started than to go back after a teen's been on it 4 or 5 years and say, hey, by the way, let's start talking about this. Okay? But even if you're in a relationship with your kids or your parents right now, and you're not having open communication, be willing to do that. And it takes both parents and teens to do this. But have open communication with your children about the dangers of social media, not to scare them away, not to say you can't use it, but train them on how to use it effectively. Okay? And it takes, for those that haven't been on social media yet, this is easier for parents to do. But for all of these guys over here that's probably using it already, if your parents aren't communicating, if they're not monitoring, go ahead and go to the next one, because I think the next one's important, and then go to the one after this one as well. You got to set reasonable limits, and I would encourage parents to monitor accounts. Again, it's going to be easier for the parent of an elementary student who's not on social media when they hand them the tablet or the phone for the first time and they get the Facebook, or they're probably not going to Facebook, and they get the Snapchats and the TikToks and the Instagrams and things of that nature. It's easier to say, okay, here's the limits. Here's how we want you to use it. And by the way, I'm going to check it periodically. I may check it 2 or 3 times a week, 4 times a week. I may check it randomly. For those teens that have been using it for years and no one's ever looked at their phones, this is a harder thing to navigate. But if you're concerned about either your children's well-being, or for teens, if you're concerned about your own well-being, let your parents have access to these things. Set reasonable limits, monitor accounts. I know that's hard. We had a rule in our house. This is one thing I do think we got right. And I know that some social media is designed that as soon as you close it, it goes away. The first one that comes to mind, does anybody take a guess? You send something to somebody, but as soon as they close it, you close it, it disappears. Somebody said it, what? Snapchat, okay? The beauty of Snapchat for teens is they can send anything they want to anybody, and as soon as they turn their phones off or get out of Snapchat, it's gone. Parent cannot get on the phone and see the snaps that person has sent. Now, what we forget sometimes is there are ways for the other person to save what's been sent. You know, how many times, I mean, I've heard stories of where people who have sent images that they should not have sent of themselves, okay? They send them, and they're comfortable sending them in Snapchat because their mind says, here in a few minutes it's gone. It's as if I didn't do it. But all it takes for the other person on the other side is to take a screenshot of it, and they've got it for as long as they want to have it. You know, so I know there's apps that you can't monitor as closely. But one of the rules we had in our household is we would monitor their accounts. We would look at their social media. We would follow them on social media. You know, we would, if they were on Instagram, we had to be one of their friends, followers, whatever they call it. Now, what can happen, not to give any ideas, but they might go make a fake account that you don't know about. But we would try to follow them, and then we would do random checks on their technology to see what was there. And when we found something, I think this is very important, parents, when we found something that was inappropriate, and we did, when we found something that was inappropriate, we didn't berate them. We didn't automatically send them to the room. We didn't take everything away for a month. We sat down with them and said, let's talk about the dangers of what we've just seen. Now, there may still be some consequences, but we try not to overreact to that. We try to talk to them and navigate through this and talk about why this is, you know, inappropriate. David, you got anything about limits or monitoring accounts or anything that you want to share there?
I'll talk a little bit in a minute. I want to share some resources about communication.
Okay.
But I do think your comment about the age of children and the age of parents, you know, we're really training our kids when we, and this was a mistake we made, very honestly, but this was pre-social media, pre-iPhones and everything, but we let them watch too much television, and it wasn't necessarily that what they were watching was bad. They just got too comfortable with the screen, you know, and I know it was Blue's Clues. It was awful, and maybe it was awful at the time. I don't know, but we just let them get too comfortable with the screen, and so accidentally, without realizing it, we were training for screen time, and it was a positive experience, but we didn't put enough limits on it, to be honest with you. So, you know, maybe it's not social media when you have young kids, but maybe it's screen. And maybe that's another way to kind of look at the whole picture.
And I think what happens in our television and our screens is the creators of that content would try to sneak things in on you that were sinful, and would couch it under entertainment or couch it under, even PBS type stuff. My kids, this dates, I don't know if anybody ever heard of Teletubbies. Raise your hand if you heard of Teletubbies. Okay, so my kids like Teletubbies. Now, I thought it was the stupidest thing ever created, personally, okay? It is, David says. I didn't like Teletubbies, but they liked it, and it was funny, whatever. But then we noticed something one day. The purple Teletubby with the name Tinky Winky, which that might have been why the show was so dumb, Tinky Winky. But the purple Teletubby named Tinky Winky, you know what it carried on its shoulder? Anybody know? I think somebody whispered it. A purse. And we thought, oh, I don't know how you know, but that's a female Teletubby. No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't. The Teletubby, the folks that created that series, it was their way to start cultivating the ground for homosexuality in something called Teletubbies. Now, what's happened is social media is doing those same kind of things across every platform, okay? So set reasonable limits, monitor accounts. Let's go to the next one.
I would say if it was just a Teletubby wearing a purse now,
yeah,
we'd be doing pretty good.
Yeah, absolutely. We've come a long way.
It's way more the
Exactly.
Wild West than that.
Exactly. All right, so then this one's for parents. You got to lead by example. You don't need to be on social media 8 hours a day. If you're on social media for 8 hours a day, you cannot talk to your kids about being on social media for 8 hours a day. You got to lead by example. You got to monitor what you listen to and what you look at. We as parents, we as adults, convince ourselves and say to ourselves, well, we're adults, we're mature, we can handle whatever we see on social media. Okay, we can handle it. We're mature. That doesn't set a real good example. It may not be true, by the way, because we can be influenced, but we cannot lead by example if we are saturating ourselves with social media. So let's lead by example as adults and parents. Next one, go on to the next part. We need to teach our kids, and please, never share any personal information on social media. You talk about dangerous, that's dangerous. Sharing any kind of personal information on social media is a dangerous proposition. We need to teach that. That's an action step as we're trying to navigate this and cultivate this well. Continuing on, the next one is we need to encourage the use of social media in positive and spiritual ways. This goes back to what I talked about early tonight. There are a lot of great things about social media. And with the invention of everything, we have a choice. We have a choice on how we use it. Doesn't matter what the invention is. It can be social media or something totally different. It's how do we use this? And as Christians, we ought to ask ourselves, how do we use social media to further the gospel of Jesus? And there are plenty of ways we do that. It's why we all stream on Facebook. It's why we stream on YouTube. It's why we put our content out there. It's why we put encouraging passages in our Twitter. It's why we get on Instagram and show what's going on at church, is because we're trying to create opportunities to use our social media for positive. Philippians chapter 4, verse 8 says, whatever is true, noble, just, right, admirable, excellent, praiseworthy, think about such things. Well, social media is going to give us plenty of negative thinking. If we're going to use it, let's saturate social media with the positive side of things. So look for and teach ways to use it positively and in spiritual ways. Continuing on, we're going to get into some website resources. And these are, I think, primarily for parents, but there may be some applications here as well. And I'm going to let David share some of these with you. And then when he gets done with this, we're going to open it up and see if you got some comments, observations, questions, and answers. So, David?
All right. So there's no way that I hope your expectation wasn't tonight that you would come here and all of a sudden for an hour we'd be able to pour the solution into you. Man, I wish that was true. I really do. But really, I think our goal has been to generate some courage within everybody here to have these conversations. And then also to equip you a little bit, and that's kind of where I'm at now. I want to share 3 websites. 2 of these are Christian-oriented websites. The third one is not, but I still think you can eat the fish and spit out the bones, if you know what I'm saying, okay? And so let's go to this first one. It is called access.org. Access.org. I would highly encourage you, parents especially, teens it's certainly fine, but this is oriented to families, okay? It is a Christian-based ministry that does a good job of creating talking guides. It has blog articles, it has podcasts, it has all kinds of things, regular updated content. In fact, stop right there on that one, that's perfect, where you can kind of get up-to-date information. This is not a, hey, we're going to spy on our teens kind of thing, and we're going to know what you're doing. It's not that. But it's more about there's just an information gap. I mean, my boys, I still call them boys, they're, I guess reluctantly, they're men at this point. They know more about the digital world than I do. They're digital natives. They've grown up with this. I remember, a lot of things before social media. In fact, most of my life was spent before that. And so this is the air they breathe. And I'm kind of in their world at this point.
David, you and I were talking about this. The folks that are in their teens and lower, they don't know a life without social media. They don't know what it was like before this came along.
So there's a couple of things specifically. I don't know if it was this slide or the one before, but you see right there, there's different types of content, but there are parents' guides to having a conversation about TikTok. There's a parent's guide, and it's not a tell your kid not to be on it. It's let's discuss these things. It's fair, it's balanced, it's accurate. There's going to be things you may not know in there. There's going to be things you may not have thought about in both groups. And so I always, as a parent, like to get resources, from somebody who's a lot smarter than me, and that's usually by asking anybody else. But it's just the way I kind of operate. But one other good thing about Access, and I don't know if Michael is in here or not, but there are some great youth ministry curriculum options that come off of this where you could offer as an idea. I know our youth minister, Brett Van Zant, did this at Kingwood, at least right before COVID. He was starting to do it. There's opportunities to have kind of intergenerational classes, watch some videos, have some discussion points around these issues, and it's very well done. And so anyway, get in there and dig. That's what I would say. So go to access.org. And then the second one is screenagersmovie.com. That's kind of a weird title for a website, but there was a documentary produced called Screenagers, which is actually kind of interesting, but they've continued to do a lot of research. This is a medical doctor, and she's just kind of passionate about this issue and the way it affects health, and so they've put lots and lots of detailed information, and those are just two of the categories there. It's a very interesting documentary, for one. But number two, these articles and these additional pieces of information are great. There are things on there such as how to work out a social media contract with your family. Now, you may be thinking, I don't want to have to do a contract. Well, you may not, but someone else in here might think, that kind of works for us. Or it might kind of help you come up with some mutual guidelines about, how do we stay at mealtime? What do we agree to do with our phones? How do we protect that time? Let's all be on the same page with this or with that. And so I think, again, what I would say is, and maybe this word will be referenced here in just a minute with the next website, but this is an ongoing conversation. That's the best thing I can say to you tonight. This is not a one and done. Let's talk about it, and then I'll see you at graduation, or I'll see you when you're young. This is an ongoing family topic that needs to be talked about. And it's very easy, I think, for all of us that are parents to go, I'm overwhelmed, I can't deal with this. And I think it's easy for teens to go, my mom and dad are so boring and out of the loop, and they're, I've heard that about some parents anyway, at least myself. They just don't know. You don't know. You don't understand. And sometimes that's true. But again, this is a way to kind of bridge that gap, come up with a third thing to be able to talk. And I think that's very helpful. Look at the last one real quick as well. It should be called thesmarttalk.org. This is the one that's connected to the National PTA. And so, again, this is not a Christian site. This has to do with educators and so forth. But I found some really good things on here, some really good, ways to talk with different ages that I really thought were good, okay? So I'd encourage you to look at that. It's about having not the conversation, but the smart talk. Talk about your smartphone. Talk about social media. Talk about screen time. Talk about all that. Because, again, I'm telling you, and you know this, regardless of the age of your children or your age, this is not something that's really going to go away. We are now in a digital age. And so learning how to deal with that is important. Learning how to talk about it in calm and reasonable and fair ways is a good thing to do. So that's kind of the three resources I would point you to. There are many more. I would also say beware, because there's a bunch of junk out there too that's like, no. And but these are three that for the most part I have found much agreement with and much help with. So I would share those with you.
Let me show you how saturated and how this thing's growing in our culture. Can anybody tell me the latest social media that launched just recently? What's it called? What? Said it. Threads. okay? Threads is owned by the companies that own what? Facebook and Instagram. And before day 3 was over, does anybody know how many subscribers to Threads they got before day 3 was over?
3,
How many?
4.
Somebody said what? 100 million. 100 million people subscribe to Threads in 3 days, in less than 3 days. And we're going to see more of these pop up and be popular as the race goes, because Threads has got to compete with Twitter, right? We have a former president that created his own platform, Truth Social. Those things are going to come out over and over again. It's not ever going away, and we can bury our heads in the sand and say, well, let's just don't use them, or we can talk about and continue to talk about, continue the conversation of how do we navigate it wisely, okay? All right, so let's wrap up. We want to kind of open it up, see if you got any questions or answers. Doesn't mean we're the experts at all. I almost feel like having Lance come up here with us, and he might can share some things that answer your questions if you have questions or thoughts. But what questions, thoughts, observations might you have? Let's open this up for a minute. And the way we always tell our folks at Kingwood is, we're done if you don't say anything, which that might be a good thing, but we want to hear from you. We want to hear what's on your mind. So give us some thoughts, comments, any questions based on anything we've talked about or anything we haven't talked about. Anything at all? This is when you plant somebody in the crowd. Somebody gonna say something? Sure. Yeah. I mean, we probably all know what she said is we talk about the spiritual stuff, but there's also a lot of misinformation about spiritual things out there in social media and on the internet. What we've all learned is just because we read it on the internet does not make it true, right? So you do have to weed through the spiritual side of things and try to figure out what you believe in and what you don't believe in. But I guess where I'm coming at this from a spiritual standpoint is I do control the content of my social media, right? I don't control your pages. I control my pages. So what I put on my pages are going to be things I believe in. Now, that also means that somebody else is going to put on their pages, spiritually speaking, some things they believe in, and I have to read through that and study through that. Now, I will also tell you this. There have been things that I have seen from the spiritual context on social media and various platforms where I've read it, and my initial take as I entered it is, okay, this is not right. But then as I've read it and studied, I thought, that's a pretty good point. I haven't thought about it that way. So it can be good for us to either reaffirm our own positions if we feel like something's incorrect. If we feel like something is incorrect, it can also be good for us to read that perspective. It might share something we haven't thought about from that perspective, and at least gives us the knowledge of where that person's coming from if we ever have a conversation with them about that issue. Does that make sense? Okay. Somebody else. David, you got anything on that comment? Okay. Anything else?
I would love to hear from the teens, but there
Put
may
them on
not
the
be
spot.
time. Well, I mean, they're all like, "Oh my word, I can't believe he went there." But I really would, because we talked a lot about Facebook, and I'm sitting here thinking, they're not on Facebook. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. But generally,
You guys are on
speaking,
Facebook. Anybody on Facebook in this first couple of rows? One,
it's okay if you
two,
are.
three.
It's
Okay,
good
we
if
got
you-
some. All right. But your number one app's what? What do you use the most, you think? What? TikTok?
TikTok, yeah.
TikTok. Yeah, that's the growing one. That's the growing one. And we don't have time, but I think that's the most dangerous one out there. And it has nothing to do with surveillance and all that kind of
And
stuff
that's
that our
not a
politicians talk
criticism of
about.
you. It's just,
Yeah, it's just all of it's dangerous. But go ahead. You want to hear from him? Why?
Well, I just, the dialogue has got to be on both sides. A lot of times it can be adults talking at teens about something, and teens, and I remember this, y'all do too, maybe, if you'll admit it, and I say, I'm putting it like two sides. We're all mixed in here together, but it is very much an issue that all ages need to be engaged in, and parents care about their teens. Teens, I know, want to do the right thing, and sometimes it's hard though because of the sensitivity of our personal lives and things like that. So I just encourage dialogue is what I really, I mean, break the mold, right? Break the mold. You know, have good talks and good relationships, even if you disagree. It's okay. So,
All right, anybody else? Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. He's talking about how accounts are hacked, cloned, stolen. You know how you'll get if you've ever been on Facebook, you'll get a notification that David Vaughn wants to be your friend, and the first thing you think of is, wait a minute, David Vaughn and I've been friends on Facebook for years, and you go search your friend list, and sure enough, you are friends. Now, either David is like my mother, who forgot his password, so added a second Facebook account. And then when I got the third request, it's because she forgot her passwords for the first two. I mean, I kid you not, my mom's got like 6 Facebook accounts. You don't know which is which. I kid you not. Which probably tells me she doesn't need to be on it.
she's a hacker.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
But you get that information, and they're going to send you stuff through that platform, video. A lot of times it's video, or click this link. And when you click this link, it's going to try to steal your information. You have to be very careful of that. Years ago, when I first got on those platforms, if there was any connection to anybody on my friends list, let's say some guy in Indiana sent me a Facebook friends request. If he was a mutual friend with David Vaughn, I would accept him. I've stopped doing that now, unless it's somebody that has a lot of mutual friends of mine, and I can figure, okay, this guy's okay. But you'll get random requests, people wanting to be your friend or follow you on whatever social media app, and they're looking to do sinister things. So that's a fair point, good point. Lance. What age should a teen be on social media, David?
Well, pediatricians say 13, so certainly not before that. That's backed up by medical advice. I think it kind of depends on the teen. I'll be honest with you. That may not be the popular answer. I mean, there's some. I raised 2 boys, and they're both driving currently. And I know they're not watching this, so I can say this, although it will be in forever, space. But they both had different skills and levels of driving ability and trust, and there were times when they earned that distrust, and there were times when they earned the trust. And so, it's similar to, it takes responsibility, it takes maturity, it takes, are you communicating with me? And so the answer is not before 13, for sure. And then I think with different training wheels, maybe before that, maybe after that at some point.
Yeah,
that's my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's right. And one thing I'll add to that, which really isn't about that question, but I was trying to think if there was one thing I would do differently with my kids that I didn't do. And as I thought about that, and I came up with the answer, this is probably more for the parents whose kids aren't there yet. Because if your kids are there yet and they're doing this, if you try to do it now, you may be about to start World War III, okay? But if you've got children that aren't on Facebook, social media apps yet, they're not using phones and iPads and tablets yet, even though they're using those things, the tablets and things in schools much younger. If they're not doing them at home, one thing I wish I would have done differently, and if I were parenting young children now, is I would absolutely not let them take those things in their bedroom when they go to bed. I absolutely would not do that. That would be one thing I would have changed if I could. When they go to bed, when they're supposed to go to bed, or when they're going upstairs to do their homework before bed, I would have their phones and tablets out of the room. Put them on chargers in the living room, put them on chargers in your room, whatever. Because from my perspective, a lot of the damage is done while we're laying our heads on the pillow, to be absolutely honest with you. So that'd be one thing I would do different if I were doing it now. Okay, Misty. Yeah, a safe that you only know the combination to works, right? But I think I was kidding about that, but your point is a good point. You know, we're the parents. We get to set the ground rules for our homes. And if you do that early, it's not a problem. Now, again, if you go home tonight, if you got a teenager and you go home tonight, and you think, hey, you can't take your phone in your room tonight, be ready for World War III, okay? But you do manage your house, and you can set that precedence and be thinking about that. You know, when these things came out, we probably didn't think about a lot of this stuff because we just didn't know, you know?
I do think it's important to recognize also there's a lot of things that have been done to help filter content. There are things you can do with your internet provider, whoever that is. There are controls that you have, parental controls and things, as well as television. But I'm thinking more about internet and things where you can see what's going on. That just provides accountability. It doesn't mean there's not trust. I know that's kind of a fine line. But the other thing I would say is that this is something that, you know, keep in mind the goal, I think, is to coach your children, to train your children about how to think about social media, that's what we're talking about tonight, in a godly way, okay? And there's so many things that can go wrong with it. There's a lot of things that can be good about it. But it's our God-given responsibility to help them understand and train and teach them. And so it's not necessarily it doesn't need to always be a battle or whatever. It needs to be a training. Just like I would not have given my children when they turned 16, I would have said, hey, here's the keys. You've seen enough Mario Kart. Go for it. I wouldn't have done that. You know, I really, really wouldn't have done that. And, they had driver's ed, and they drove with us, and then they had a year of driving with us and scaring us to death, and all that kind of stuff. So it's a process of training. There will be mistakes. You will make parenting mistakes, I promise you. You already have, you will in this area. Teens, you will make mistakes in this area. How do you work through them? How do you work together to do that?
Absolutely. All right, I know we're out of time. Anybody got any final question before we wrap up in prayer? Well, thank you guys for letting us come. Thanks for the invite. I hope that we've given you some things to at least ponder and consider. I hope it's what you're looking for tonight. Again, we're not going to be able to bury our heads in the sand and say social media is of the devil. Let's not ever use it. So the question becomes, how do we use it effectively and wisely? How do we use it for God's glory, for God's honor, for benefits to us and those around us? And that's what we're all working toward. All right, let's pray together. Father God, thank you so much for loving us. Thank you for giving David and I the opportunity to come and share with Fairlane tonight, and help all of us, Father, as we navigate this world we call social media. We thank you for the positives of it. We thank you for the way it connects us with so many different people and people maybe we haven't seen in the past or in the recent history, and be able to keep up with families and friends across the globe. Thank you for all those things, and thank you for the ways that we're using it spiritually, and may we look to expand those ways. We also, Father, ask you to help us with the dangerous side of this. Help us to see the warning signs. Help us to make wise decisions. Help us to put action steps in our own individual lives as well as the lives of our family that will help us to navigate this in ways that you would be pleased with. Thank you for this church here. Continue to help them impact the community that they live with and live in. And we pray your blessings upon them. And help us, Father, to always be great representatives of yours. Thank you for Jesus. Thank you for salvation that's found in his name. And forgive us when we fall woefully short of being like Jesus. It's in his name we pray. Amen.